Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all there. We've got a couple people with us today. It's good to see people coming back physically at the center. So welcome to our Thursday evening self-healing class. This is a class that we've been doing for many years. I encountered the Louise Hay material, I think it was in 1986, and I've been with this material facilitating groups ever since. So I'm glad you're able to connect with us here in New York. I want to give a shout out to the people on Instagram and Facebook Live and also YouTube. And especially I'd like to invite you to join our our Zoom calls. Then you can interact with us afterwards. So if you're listening to this at some point in the future, also send us a message and we can send you an invitation. So however you're finding us, I want to say, well, I'm glad you're with us. There's always questions, there's always answers after each gathering, each lesson, and everybody's invited. So just send Jimmy a message if you're listening, say on Instagram right now or Facebook. We meet every Thursday at 7, as you know, and for those of you who are watching now, and also Sunday mornings at 10:30. Most of the messages that we present here are around the work of Louise Hay, who was a student at our center, or Ernest Holmes, and there's a few other authors that we refer to quite often. Every week, it's a timely topic, and we have discussion afterwards, as I said. And this week we're talking about doing the work. And I thought about changing the title as I was preparing this lesson because a lot of people in my life haven't really been fond of the word work. And that's probably a lot of people. I want to give credit to those of you on the call who consistently show up, because it's obvious to me as I see you and I hear you, and as you connect with us in the center, that you're making changes, you're having demonstrations. We listen to the remarks, the feedback. And this teaching will cause you to grow and to make demonstrations. Your life will start to work better and better the more you participate in your own process. Sadly, some of you, disappear for a week, 2, sometimes a month or 2. But then I noticed there's a good deal of those folks come back. So it's a process. For me, the more you stay plugged into this teaching, the better it works. There's a quickening that will take place for you. If you just tune in occasionally, that's great. You can get the equivalent of a faith lift, some encouragement, some positive motivation. But if you stay plugged in, it'll happen more quickly because you'll be catching yourself faster as you go into stories of one kind or another. Some of us, I keep thinking of a song from that movie, Star is Born. Some of us are longing to change, right? You want to go into a deeper place. And you can. It's possible with this teaching. Some of you want to go there. You don't want to have the superficial life where you're chasing things that don't exist. And you realize with this teaching that you are caused your own experience. So you can take it to a much deeper level if you want to. The key word to have that happen is developing a certain vigilance. If you're vigilant about your thoughts and your emotions and attempting to get them somewhat harnessed, you'll be developing what Ernest Holmes spoke of as your executive power. You'll see great changes in your life sooner than later. The process of learning is always the same, no matter what you're trying to learn. Whether you're trying to learn a new app on your phone or a new program, learning how to use your new phone or a new computer or driving a car, keyboarding, playing tennis, or just learning to think in a more positive way. It's a process. I learned about this when I was a kid from my father, who was teaching me, was Benjamin Franklin's self-help. So he wrote the first self-help book, and he essentially was saying, assume a virtue if you have it not. And he had a chart and a system. I think it was either 12 or 16 weeks and a pegboard. And he would just notice if he was being miserly, or if he was being gluttonous, or if he, whatever it was, he was keeping track of his behavior and his thoughts. And he had a system where he would assume a virtue if he had it not, and he began to practice it. So in anything, anything, there's going to be a process, and a certain amount of effort will be needed to master anything. So if you're here, good for you. You're one of the smart ones, because that means you know that there aren't any really quick fixes out there, and you understand that everything that's going to happen to you is going to happen through you and your consciousness. If you can imagine there's a big mirror, a huge mirror that's reflecting back all your thoughts, the ones that no one can hear except you, you'll start to understand how the process really works. So we'll get into that a little bit more today. Sadly, most people in the world, their actual deep-seated programming is far more negative than positive. It's a fact, and nobody really likes to hear it. But most of the people aren't living their lives with a deep sense of connection. They may be living their lives in a sense of fear, trembling, worry. So that's the reality of, you'd say, most of the people on the planet. Most people are caught up in the consciousness of separation. So they don't come from the place we come from. In our teaching, we understand that we're one with Source. And when we're awake to that, oh my goodness, the gates of the heavens, or reality opens, and the kingdom is at hand and always has been. But a person has to be living from that place of connection, realizing that, to have that be their reality. And that's not the reality of most of the world. So let me try to explain a little bit more. We are trained to show up as positive people. I know I was trained. Both my mother and father, everybody was training me to be a good boy, the best little boy in the world, and I'm sure you all got a version of it. So you got socialized. And we have been tamed to learn how to be acceptable and to fit in society, how to dress and how to walk and how to speak and how to behave. And we've learned how to be pleasing. You might think at first glance that's a good thing, but when you really look at it, you'll probably want it to be less and less so. We over time have adapted and molded ourselves to be whatever we think society wants us to be. At least that would be most of us. So if you stay with me for a second, we've learned how over time to present ourselves in a way where people might think we're nice, we're pleasing. We've been socialized to be good, so they say, oh, Robert's so nice. And so, this is us. We're creating everybody to be nice, which is good, right? We've adopted a certain code of conduct. We have attitudes and behaviors that have been going on for years, right? Because this is part of what happened when we were children. In the 4 agreements, they would say, these are the agreements you formed since the day of your birth going forward. So in our classes, we challenge ourselves. We do a lot of work in our classes. We do what we call inner work. In Science of Mind, they'll say we do our work in mind, in consciousness. I quite often quote Louise Hay from the book You Can Heal Your Life, and she talks about the all-important inner dialogue. That's the reason I'm always focused on that on Thursday night, because that inner dialogue is the most important thing in the world, and it's what you think hour by hour and day by day. And even though many of us have learned how to tame it, or at least outwardly we learned how to behave, there's this inner stuff that is with us, right? And outwardly we learn how to modify our behavior, and we learn many of us, to be gracious and all of that. But there's still that part in many of us, if not all of us, that reacts and sometimes roars and feels hurt and gets angry. We find this theme played out in so many different traditions, things I've been exposed to over my life, from the Course in Miracles to the 4 Agreements to Louise Hay's work, Ralph Waldo Emerson's work, Ernest Holmes. If in the healing work in the Four Agreements, which we just did a piece on recently, the author lays it all out, just as Louise did. They explain the situation and they show us how to do the work. Louise would have said the bottom line for everybody is we don't feel good enough. We just don't. We feel like we're not enough. And it shows up. We're competitive. Then we try to overcompensate. So we're going to show you I'm better because I really don't feel like I'm good. And it's competitive and it's just what we do. All these authors, the ones I mentioned, would essentially be saying the same thing. They'd be saying most of the multitude or the masses feel inadequate, and many are caught up in trying to improve their circumstances, and they're trying to improve their outer world, which is pretty normal in a way. It's like we're always trying to make a statement to prove that we're good enough, and sometimes we try to prove we're superior, which is even worse. It would be really nice if we could get to a place where we can accept ourselves as we are, where we love, accept, and approve of ourselves exactly as we are. Then there wouldn't be anything to prove. But people right here in this room and on this call aren't there yet, so you can imagine what it is for people everywhere. You heard the expression, it's a dog-eat-dog world, and very competitive and all of that. Well, that's born out of a sense of not being supplied and supported. So they're missing the faith part of it. And oftentimes people are projecting all their inadequacies upon other people. So they're living life, from our vantage point, backwards. If you want to stifle yourself and snuff out your life or kill your spirit, you just keep living that way. In the book, The Four Agreements, he said we have so many agreements that we don't even know who we are anymore. We don't know who we've come here to be. We find ourselves 60 years old and, what do I want to do when I grow up? And we had all these ideas when we were kids of the things that gave us joy and happiness, but many of us have gotten far, far, far away from some of that. So if you really want to transform your life, you're in the right place. And transformation can happen quicker than you think. It might have taken you many years to build up all these ideas and these stories and this belief system that's creating your life, but you can dismantle it thought by thought, and there is a quickening in the process when you become vigilant and you do the work. I'll say something now to be funny. I want to make sure I say it because otherwise someone could feel insulted. I'll say something, again, not to be hurtful. Otherwise, it's like you're trying to put a lipstick on a pig. Okay, you can dress yourself up and make it all look nice. But underneath is something that really not very pretty. So, do you want to be the person who's putting on the lipstick, or do you want to be the person who is really learning to love yourself? Because we can all act nice for a little bit, right? So Emerson said it much more eloquently years ago when he said, "What you do speaks so loudly, I cannot hear a darn word you say." So it shows up, right? Whatever it is that's actually living inside of you shows up. It has to come out. Nobody's that good of an actor to keep on playing that role. Who you are and what you are is announced in the world. Nobody can cover it up all the time. The author of the Four Agreements explains that we have made so many agreements within our family structures, our society, our religions, and our brief life. We have formed so many contracts that we've learned how to be acceptable, how to be pleasing, and how to be nice. We've learned what people expect us to be, like try to please our mothers or fathers. We've learned what's expected as we grow up. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. That's how it happened, right? That's how it continues to happen. You can imagine yourself, just for a moment, as a spiritual being with lots and lots of strings of twine. So you're a being of light. And you can imagine these strings of twine going round and round and round you, all your limbs, your legs, your torso, your neck, and your head, wrapped around all over you with every agreement. It's another piece of twine going round and round you. Tiny little threads circling round and round. Do you feel free? If you can imagine yourself all tied up in twine, and you've been doing it for years, right? Do you think you'd be moving around with joy, grace, and ease with all this twine for many, many years circling around you? Can you feel resentments? Can you sense that you would be frustrated with all these agreements? And the answer, of course, is yes. The answer for most people is yes. They feel constricted if they're willing to bare their soul and tell you, all these agreements that I've had all my life are making me feel constricted. But most people are really unwilling to be that honest with themselves. So at least the people on this call tonight, or the people who will be listening to it in the future, you can see how this all occurs. So younger people, if you're listening, don't be blaming your parents. They did the best they could with what they had. But we do want to, in our class tonight, in our day-to-day living, we want to, in the work that we do, we want to be looking at these agreements. We want to look at our beliefs in the light of day, to have the willingness to first love ourselves with all our faults. That's the shadow part of yourself. We got to acknowledge, okay, sometimes we are this, sometimes we're that. Debbie Ford did great work with that years ago, and I saw a couple of videos where there was a scene where a woman was really acting terrible, and Debbie Ford said, "I am that," and she was calling her own self a bitch, and I don't mean to use that word in this class, but Debbie Ford was acknowledging herself to be bitchy. I am that person. I am all of these things. So part of what we want to do is we have to have the willingness to say, okay, I'm not just this person, this perfect person who's so nice. I have to own those parts of myself. If I want to get to a place where I can love, accept, and approve of myself, that means I do it totally. And I understand that I'm doing the best that I can today. And really you approach life with that consciousness. And then we have the willingness, again, the willingness is first to love ourselves where we are and accept all of our faults. And then have the willingness to release these threads, these tiny threads or these agreements, these old ideas one by one. Now there's lots of ways to do that, and we will teach them in this class week by week. We can teach you how to do really powerful affirmative prayer. We can just educate here. We replace each and every agreement, each and every lesser agreement with empowering and powerful ones, changing the negative to the positive. When you're coming to a place of self, you'll do that as you come to a place of self-acceptance and self-approval. Anything that looks like critical, your critical dialogue with yourself, you'll begin to drop that. Every time like I used to look in the mirror and say, oh, you're a dumb whatever. You have to stop that type of languaging. Just let it go and replace it. As you do this, you're going to become a more willing person, someone who's willing to see the good in every kind of situation. Now that's quite a person, if you're able to see the good in every situation. That's a real practitioner. That's the real thing. You'll be neutralizing, this is what I can't think of the organization. They call it the racket, okay? You'll be neutralizing the racket of thoughts or the critic that lives inside of you that's creating havoc. So we have this aspect of ourselves I mentioned briefly before, which some people call the shadow. And we learn to embrace it. We look at it, and as we understand how it happened with all these agreements, right? And then inwardly we don't feel adequate, and outwardly we're an actor. So that stuff has to get reconciled, and we want to accept it and love it, and lovingly embrace ourselves totally so we can move forward. And eventually, another author used to say, all these battered places that are hidden within come to light. Long ago, someone told me to think of yourself as a being of light. Okay, that's easy to imagine. Think of a globe of light, and that's you. And when you were a young child, you had all this light and this joy that just shone spontaneously, naturally. You were completely full of joy, and you could play and laugh and respond authentically because you had not yet been socialized. Over time, this light could not be seen as well. As you can imagine, those twines of those agreements coming round and round and round, and all that radiance, that brilliance, gone, or at least most people can see it anymore. As we learn how to be more acceptable in the world, we were covering the self up more and more with layers of smoky threads. It was hard for people to see the light in one another because most people had created the same thing for themselves. The work we do always, in every class and all the time, is clearing away the negation that Holmes talked about, the negativity, clearing away our critical projections. You know, whenever you're talking to someone and you have a desire to make them better, and really you're criticizing them, stop it for your own sake. Stop in the name of love. Work on yourself, okay? The work is replacing the old agreements and making a new covenant with yourself, a deeper agreement with yourself. Making a new agreement based upon the premise, and I'd like everybody to say this in your mind or say it out loud to yourself. You're going to make a new agreement based upon the premise that I am good enough. And you might repeat it to yourself and say, I am good enough, and you might add, I love, accept, and approve of myself right now. I'm good enough, and I love, accept, and approve of myself right now, the way I am. Our founder was quoted as saying, find me one person, just one human being, who's so redeemed from the bondage of self, and I will find a savior, I will find a redeemer. I'll find a person that I want to hang out with, I want to commune with, right? Because that person's living the affirmative life. He or she doesn't have the time to be saying, oh, you're bad, you're wrong, you know. What that person sees is the goodness and the godliness in every person, so every encounter becomes a holy encounter. That person has become redeemed of the bondage of self because they have no time to be talking about other people. They're really preoccupied in seeing the world as it truly is. It's a spiritual system. There's one life, there's one energy, and we're all part of it. So that person has attained a certain enlightenment where they don't see the sinfulness or what's wrong in the other people. They see that everyone's evolving in light and love. And they realize that everyone is a being of light and worthy of my love and of my appreciation. So that's the work that we do. See the good in everyone and most of all in ourselves. And I'll say, is it easy? No, it's not easy at all. Because it's really always about working with you and all your perceptions and agreements of a lifetime. Can you consciously evolve? The answer to that is yes, absolutely. You will start to be lifted up in consciousness where you will start to see everything in a much, much different way as you do this work. I love quoting Reverend Ike at this point where he used to say, you just can't lose with the stuff we use. Are you doing the work means, are you a lifter? Are you an applauder of people? Do you say, hey, good, great job? I mean, look for the opportunities to do that. If you have something negative to say to tear someone down or what people are doing, the work they're doing, it's better that you remain silent because that really is a projection of yourself anyway. So are you doing the work means are you a lifter? Or are you an asset to the world and to yourself? A lot of us, quite honestly, learn by trial and error. You know, you put your hand on this and it hurts, and okay, you're going to learn not to put your hand on it again. We fumble and we bumble as our subconscious mind learns by trial and error. As we practice this teaching, it gets easier and easier. As you plug in more, you realize, okay, I'm using the word should a lot. In Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life, she'll say, wherever you see a person who's using the word should a lot, that indicates to the person has patterns of rigidity. Now, okay, so that isn't to condemn us when we find that we do it, but it's just to notice. If you're really telling everybody else how to do things, you're kind of like probably got a control issue, and you want everything to be a certain way. So you're not going to be too much fun to be around, and you're not going to be enjoying yourself much. So we do the work to let go of these things. We want life to be better, and it can be. No one's going to be perfect in the practice the first day. Whatever you're doing is, as you embark on this journey, it's going to get better, though, quickly. You do whatever you can do today, and that will be good enough. And it's never too late to start your day over. And so if you're having a day where everything went to hell in a handbasket, you just say, okay, self, stop. And we're going to start this over again. There's nobody nicer to be nicer to than you. So really the goal is to treat yourself with kindness and nurture yourself, because this is the missing ingredient through the years, if you're trying to conform to what everybody else wants. So we need to partner with ourselves and become better friends to ourselves and nurture ourselves more. And then we will more authentically be able to do that with others. Couple more points, and I think this will be for the evening. We must learn that spiritual laws, we must learn about spiritual laws, like, God can't do for me what God can't do through me. The idea is, if I want my life to be better, it isn't about praying to some distant force. It's not like hitting the lottery, getting the magic thing. The universe can't do for me what it can't do through me. So I need to enlarge that part of myself to let that in, be it more love or more prosperity, more of any good thing. It might be a good idea to start each day contemplating and recognizing that you're part of this one life and that it responds to you. Remind yourself of that. And wherever you can put some gratitude into the equation, be it in the morning when you wake up or in the evening as you think through your day, those are great beginning steps. Working with an affirmation that works for you. The one that I used for many years is, I love, accept, and approve of myself. Another was, this is God in my life. Whatever the heck it might be whatever is happening, no matter how good or how challenging, I would say, this is God in my life. And Bill Tolliver was one of my great teachers. I learned from those years in Science of Mind. Challenge yourself to be a lifter. See yourself as an applauder. You're here to be an applauder. You're here to see the good or the God. I learned that from Edwene Gaines. She used the words God and good synonymously. I look to see the good and the God and the good. And if you're determined to have that kind of vision to see the good, you will see the good. And you will become the kind of person that Ernest Holmes spoke about when he talked about, find me one person who's so redeemed from the bondage of self, and that's the person you want to hang out with. And you are well on your way to becoming that kind of person as you do this work. So that ends the lesson. One quote from Louise: love who and what you are, love what you do, laugh at yourself more, love life, and nothing can ever touch you. And so it is. Okay. Thank you.